today. So let's get started. And hello, everyone. Really glad that you can join us today. Welcome to the first program of 2022 of the Culinary Historians of Ann Arbor. Hope your day is going well. I'm Glenda Bullock. I'm the program chair of the CHAA. And our speaker today is Danielle Dreilinger. She's a journalist and she is the author of The Secret History of Home Economics, How Trailblazing Women Harness the Power of Home and Change the Way We Live. Our online host for today's program is the Ann Arbor District Library, and they provide the promotional and tech support for us on Zoom. We are always ever so grateful to them. I imagine that most people now know how Zoom works, but just in case, we are recording this. So if you don't want your face to be seen on the recording, please turn off your video. Your microphone will be muted during the talk, but Danielle will be able to take questions at the end as time allows. To ask a question, you should use the raise hand button, and then Tyler will call on you and you can ask your question in person, or you can use the chat feature, which is at the bottom of your screen. If you do use the chat feature, though, we do ask you don't send your question to everyone, but send it to the Ann Arbor District Library, and then we can moderate and ask Danielle questions at the end of her presentation. One more tip, and that is that at the top right of your screen, there's a button that says View. If you click on that, you will want to choose Speaker View or Side-by-Side View instead of Gallery View, so that you can see Danielle close up and not see a gallery of faces. We always like to start with a little information about the Culinary Historians of Ann Arbor. We're an informal group of people who are interested in the history and culture of food and cooking. We have monthly meetings between September and May, and since September of 2020, we have been meeting on Zoom, and we are looking forward to the day when we can meet again in person. But until then, we are taking advantage of the library's generosity to host speakers from around the country, like today's presentation, which is coming to us from North Carolina. We also have 2 theme meals a year. Unfortunately, we had to postpone the meal we had planned for December, and I'm sure everyone understands why. Hopefully, we'll be able to reschedule that for this summer. So if you're not a member of the CHAA, we would love to have you join us. Our membership dues are just $25 a year. That's for an individual or a family, and it includes a subscription to our quarterly magazine, Repast, which is edited by Randy Schwartz. So if you'd like to join our group, you can find membership information on our website. You can even join online. Just go to culinaryhistoriansannarbor.org and click on membership. And now for today's speaker. Danielle Dreilinger is a North Carolina storytelling reporter for the Gannett USA Today network. She is, as I said, the author of the critically acclaimed book, The Secret History of Home Economics. It was published in May of last year by W.W. Norton. Before moving to Durham, North Carolina in 2021, she was a 2018 Knight-Wallace Journalism Fellow here at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and she also has worked for the New Orleans Times-Picayune, WGBH News, and the Boston Globe. And I could go on, but I have seen her opening slide, and I do believe she is going to fill us in on the rest of her biographical information herself. So I am just going to say how really pleased we are to have you here with us, Danielle, and let you take it away.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. And I'm so happy that there are so many of you here. I'm Danielle. This here is Malcolm. He is 7 months old. These book talks are new to him, so I'm trying to get him out of the way, but he may show up. So yeah, it's great to be here with you guys. I love to see that some of you are cooking and some of your cats are also watching. And this is going to be a little longer presentation than I normally give because we have the time for it, and I wanted to take advantage of that. So I'm going to share my screen now, and here we are. So this is, let's see. Yep. So this is, you guys can see the slide now, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so today what I want to focus on was not just the secret history of home economics, but specifically because I am here with the culinary historians, the history of home economics food. So, the subtitle of my book is How Trailblazing Women Harness the Power of Home and Change the Way We Live. And we're going to talk about the way we eat. So a little bit more about me. As you can see, that's Malcolm on the bottom. That's Action Cat on the top. As Glenda said, I'm at the USA Today Network now, and I was at the University of Michigan in 2017, 2018, which is when, and I started this book as part of that fellowship. And actually, I'm going to stop the share for a minute. So, and actually, I want to tell you guys that, were it not for Jan Langone, I might not have come up with this book idea in the first place, because I was a finalist for Knight-Wallace the year before with a totally different idea. And I was at the interview and they said, well, what do you like to do for fun? And I said, oh, buy New Orleans things. I was living in New Orleans at the time. And I said, well, I cook a lot. And one of the interviewers said, oh, there's this amazing culinary collection at the University of Michigan libraries. If you came here, you could check that out. And I could see the light go off, above my head, right? I could just see how excited I got. And then when I was thinking about the project I wanted to pitch for the second time that I applied, because I wasn't interested in the first project anymore, I thought, well, I want to use the culinary collection. That sounds fun. I want to write a book, and it should have something to do with my hobbies as well as my professional interests, because I hear it's going to be a lot of work, which P.S. it was. And I thought I should use the culinary collection. So I put various ideas in my head and I came up with, home economics. I should write about the history of home economics. So it is then thanks to Jan Langone that am here today with this book. So let's go back to the slides here. So just some basics about the history of home economics and the present for that matter. So here's the stereotype, right? This is what people think that home economics is about. They think that it is about Donna Reed, June Cleaver, the feminine mystique, this housewife just, trapped barefoot and pregnant, and, women learn. Some of you guys may have gone to college in the time when girls were pushed into home economics rather than, chemistry or engineering or physics. And that's not the reality of home economics at all. The reality is this. This is Flemmi Kittrell. She was the dean of home economics at Howard University, also at Hampton. She was a pioneering nutrition researcher and global educator and a chemist, right? And here she is at her lab table, apparently advertising margarine. But this is what the image that's on the cover of the book, because I just really wanted to highlight the fact that home economics is not what people think it is. So, it was not trapping women in the kitchen. It was not sewing aprons. It was not exclusively for white women. It was not baking sourdough bread at home, training women to be housewives. It was about redesigning the kitchen through science to reduce physical strain, get your work done faster. It was about, instead of sewing aprons, setting manufacturing standards for fabric so that shoppers were actually getting what they thought they were buying. It was done buying for women of all races. It was about buying bread at the store and analyzing which made more sense, which was better for your budget, which was better for your time. And it was very much about creating jobs. Home economics was, from the start, a field created for and by career women. So it began in 1841, picked up speed in the 1890s, really hit its stride from about 1910 to, I'd say, 1970. And it still exists today as a much smaller field. And, the basic idea was that they were going to bring science into the home so that women could do their housework faster and do other things with their time, whether that was have a paid job or get involved in their communities or spend time with their kids or go to school, whatever they wanted. And it was about, and this is where food really comes in, it was about creating a range of jobs where women were going to be accepted because they were related, however tangentially at times, to traditional in the home roles that women had held. So it was food. Oh, 1841 is very specific. I just saw a quick question. That was the year that Catherine Beecher, sister of Harriet Beecher Stowe, wrote a book about what she then called domestic economy. It's called a Treatise of Domestic Economy. And it was the first book to say that housekeeping was not stupid, that it was intelligent, that required thought, that was scientific, and that needed to be taught in schools. So looking at then where food fit into this. Food was the biggest part of home economics, but very much not baking brownies and making cookies. So home economists, whether they worked in business or in schools, we're going to get to all of that, were educators, and they were promoting nutrition. They were using recipes in the classroom. They were trying to keep students' interest. They were trying to keep the interest of readers. They were trying to make life easier, as I said, in the kitchen. They were trying to promote ingredients, industries, restaurants, and they were investigating the science of meat, like what happened when you cooked meat. And they were promoting thrift for a good portion of home economics heyday, because that period covered World War I and the Great Depression and World War II. So it was all times when it was very important to, make do with what you had nutritionally. And I put this together, this list, because a lot of people have really mocked home economics food all through, really. There were people who were saying it was boring, that it was heavy, that it was tasteless. The historian Laura Shapiro wrote a wonderful book called Perfection Salad that talked about making things dainty and the uses of white sauce. People made fun of it, convenience food in the 50s, which home economists were very involved in. And I put this big slide here just because the point I want to make is that the purpose of food in home economics was not to be delicious. Like, there are some recipes that are tasty, there are some that are awful, and I'm going to amuse us all with some of the awful ones as well as some of the good ones. But deliciousness was not the point. This was not about gourmet cooking. This was not about Julia Child, though they were very pleased that Julia Child found a way to, make a career out of being a cookbook writer and cooking teacher. It was not about being fancy. It was about all of these very pragmatic roles that food plays in our lives. So I'm going to start just from fairly early on. So, early on, this is the home economists were trying to promote food as nutrition. Nutrition was always the most important emphasis that they had. So this here is the Rumford Kitchen. It was an exhibit at the World's Fair of 1893 in Chicago. It was put together by Ellen Swallow Richards, who is one of the founding mothers of home economics. She was the first woman to attend MIT. She was a chemistry major. She was the first woman to teach at MIT, and she became interested in public health and the role that science could play in making women's lives better. So she is, really one of the major figures. And she put together this project. She had been working on ways to make nutritious food accessible to people on a limited income. And this is really the very beginning of nutrition. They have not discovered most of the vitamins that we know of today. They are still just starting to popularize the concept of the calorie, which, obviously a way that they changed our lives, whether we like it or not. And so this was, they sent out brought out these leaflets as, tens of thousands of people walked through their lunchroom at the World's Fair. And they looked at the, foods that they were serving at the kitchen, and they put the leaflets out into a book afterwards. So for instance, here's what they show you, right? Like 4 standard luncheons. And they're talking about the protein or proteid, older term, the fat value, the carbohydrates, the calories of these menus, right? Which they had weighed in ounces and grams. And this looks fairly normal to us because we're used to things like why am I forgetting the word? On food packages, right? We're used to like the nutritional facts label. That's something that home economists came up with. This breaking down of food into its nutritional components was totally new. By the way, the other menus, they all feature butter and rolls or bread. Some have apple cake, one has gingerbread, one has baked apples. The other entrees are pea soup, beef broth, and escalloped fish. And at the end, they also listed the cost of materials, which ranged from 3.49 cents for the pea soup to 5.34 cents for the fish. Again, so I was trying to jump around like the things that I've learned to share some of the fun stuff with you. It's really hard to figure out what to leave out of this presentation. So similarly, this is 1918. This is from Good Health magazine, which was put out by the Battle Creek Sanitarium right in Battle Creek, Michigan. And this was John Harvey Kellogg's magazine, and his home economist, nutritionist, dietitian, Lena Francis Cooper, whom we're going to speak about a little bit more later. John Harvey was a vegetarian. They promoted vegetarianism for health. So she had this monthly column in the magazine where she would give you these recipes, all of which are vegetarian. So this is segmented oranges with whipped cream. And she has you supreme an orange, and actually, yeah, you're supposed to supreme it. Yes, it's not quite, you're not slicing it crosswise. And you would sprinkle it with sugar, you would serve it with whipped cream. They had nut loaf, they had these early vegetarian meat substitutes, which and in fact, the biggest source of information on Lena Francis Cooper is this enormous bibliography put together by historians of vegetarian food. Unfortunately, incidentally, as I go on at length, this is like something that looks very modern to us. This magazine was also a major promoter of eugenics. John Harvey was pretty awful. There is nothing that I found explaining whether or not Lena herself like espoused beliefs about the superior race, but she was just fine with having her work run in their magazine, and she was a close associate of John Harvey Kellogg, which is one of the less pleasant sides of home economics. So moving on, wartime rationing. So this was a lot of the work, the nutrition work that home economists did in both World War I and World War II. And in a way, it's fascinating to see, like, to think of this in light of our gluten-free cooking nowadays, right? So in both World War I and World War II, wheat was, in World War II was officially rationed. In World War I, it was basically the government was trying to convince people to eat less wheat. They never actually imposed rationing. So home economists, and this is also 1918, did a bunch of research to try to come up with wheatless recipes. I have not tried this one, by the way. Some of these I have tried, so this one I've not. So this is the barley cornflour biscuits, and it calls for, it's barley flour, it's corn flour, there's no wheat, rather a lot of bakings of, it seems, pardon me, I just lost my notes here. And we have another example here. So this is actually developed by the same people at the Cornell Home Economics School. This is for World War II. And it was ways to use soybeans. So you created this soybean pulp mixture with soy pastry, and you baked it, and it, it's obviously seasoned with honey and pumpkin spice latte seasonings for lack of a better for lack of a better term. And they were looking for ways to promote when I look at this, I think of the 70s cookbook Laurel's Kitchen. If any of you guys have read that cookbook, right? And there are ways of like putting soy into everything. I can't imagine that this would have been all that good because soybean needs to be treated pretty carefully if it's not going to be quite bitter. So the World War I work on nutrition and rationing turned into the Bureau of Home Economics. So this is something that surprises people a lot when I talk about home economics, is that there was an entire bureau within the USDA of home economics. It was Louise Stanley is there on the left. Was the chief. This is a pie contest that she and one of her colleagues are apparently judging. And they did a lot besides food. They also looked at clothing. They looked at economies of time. They did time use studies for how women in various walks of life spent their days. So the kind of things that we look at today from like the Bureau of Labor, right, about how much time women spend taking care of their kids, that was the foundation of that work. But they certainly did a lot of recipes as well. And they had all of these radio talks. Radio was just getting started, and they were using radio to reach housewives all over the place. So we have some more protein fun here. So this was actually done by the predecessor to the Bureau of Home Economics, which is the U.S. Office of Extension Work. But this is Attractive Ways of Using Cowpeas, 1918. That would be, field peas or black-eyed peas to us. And because they were part of the USDA, one of the jobs of the Bureau of Home Economics was to promote surplus. Like if there was a surplus, they were going to help you use it so that more people would buy farmers' products. Similarly, they had a campaign in the 30s where they did a lot of work on how to use cotton in your sewing at home and in your, reupholstering, for instance, because they got the dictate that they had to promote the cotton industry. So here we are. Since there's a large surplus of cowpeas just at this season, we need to stress attractive ways of using them. They are a nourishing food and make good meat substitute dishes. And among the recipes is Hoppin' John, which is, a perfectly, I made it I made black-eyed peas, not Hoppin' John to be exact, for New Year's Day for luck, which is a Southern tradition. But yeah, this is just a totally ordinary Hoppin' John recipe where you're soaking the peas overnight in water, cooking it with rice. Here's another one of my favorite. They were, promoting local food, I suppose, which is Reindeer Recipes, which I wish I knew who did. Like, I love the graphic of the cover here. And yeah, they were promoting reindeer keeping as an agricultural industry in Alaska. And they have all these different ways of serving reindeer. I have never had the opportunity to eat reindeer. Hopefully, I can only assume that this is a good way of cooking it. They do say that, like all game, it is very lean and you have to be careful not to dry it out. So they have a more complicated recipe where they, have you lard the reindeer with strips of bacon. And this, of course, this they want you to cook it fairly gently. It seems like, after creating a nice crispy crust. And perhaps probably the most influential recipes that the Bureau of Home Economics put out were those by Aunt Sammy. So Aunt Sammy was the sister of Uncle Sam, though some people thought that she was Uncle Sam's wife, but like I went back to the original press releases, she was his sister. And she was this, fictional radio character, like an early Betty Crocker, who talked to the listener in this sort of just us folks way to talk about all sorts of recipes and ways that you can, other home economics things you could do around the house. And I wanted to highlight this recipe, which is the wilted dandelion greens, just because this is something that we would eat today, right? Like it's just, and it's very simple. It's just washed, shred it, stew it, wilt it pretty quickly, right? It's followed by a recipe for kale, one for deep fried onion rings, which sounded really delicious. And this cookbook, Aunt Sammy's Radio Recipes and Radio Recipes Revised, sold tons of copies. It was the first cookbook translated into Braille. And I think it also shows how popular, like how much of an appetite there was in the radio for this homemaking content, because like radio is a terrible way to learn how to cook something, right? Like it's a terrible way to share a recipe. And they used to tell people, like, you can write in for this free pamphlet that has the recipe on it, because, otherwise you would be listening to the radio while you're in the middle of doing something else. And like, what are you going to do? Like stop and write down the recipe. So I wanted again to highlight how modern this is, but I will say that they have the cookbook also turns out to be one of the places that I first saw this hilarious monstrosity, candle salad. Some of you guys may have, I had never seen this. I'd never seen this before I started reading home economics cookbooks. It is exactly what it looks. It is. That is garnished with yellow salad dressing to represent tallow running down the sides of a lighted candle. There are some versions that have that as like whipped cream or sort of and you could do it with any number of things. But, you look at this and you just have to wonder what they were thinking, right? Like, did they not see, right? Did they not see what this looks like? Was it somebody's like amazing? Was it somebody's joke? If any of you guys know this, please like put it in the chat, because I would love to go back in time and ask them what they were thinking. So moving on to, we're just going to touch on this briefly, but another of the sort of less savory, so to speak, parts of home economics food was food as a tool for assimilation. This was often done there was school lunch that home economists were, home economists were the primary people pushing school lunch programs in the first place. Ellen Swallow Richards did a pilot program in the city of Boston. And one of the things that they liked about school lunch, mostly they liked that, hungry kids can't learn. So it made sure that kids could learn. It was a way to teach nutrition. It was a way to train people for these food careers. The quote unquote lunch lady, that's a home economics career. And they worked very successfully as well to create eventually the National School Lunch Program and to create the nutritional standards that went into it, including the food groups. But they also did see it as a way to quote unquote Americanize immigrants, or in some cases, people who were there before the Anglos. So this is one of the particularly noxious books about this. It's called Americanization Through Homemaking. It's from 1929. It was written by a California home economics teacher. And, here she is, basically, here she is shaming the Mexican child's lunch. So the noon lunch of the Mexican child quite often consists of a folded tortilla with no filling. Such a lunch is not conducive to learning. The child becomes lazy. His hunger unappeased, he watches for an opportunity to take food from the lunchboxes of more fortunate children. Thus, the initial step in a life of thieving is taken. So pretty horrible. And, focusing on this tortilla, right? She's not saying like these kids come to school without enough food, which in and of itself, like, where is the compassion? Yes. But I noticed the focus on the tortilla, and there was a lot of shaming of non-quote unquote American food. And in settlement houses and home economics classrooms in cities, often kids were taught these very bland Anglo recipes like pea soup and baked apples, right? As a way that, with the thought that they would then go home and teach their parents instead of eating, macaroni, for instance. But a really wonderful exception, and pretty much just need to find a way to squeeze her into this presentation, is the amazing home economist Fabiola Cabeza de Baca Gilbert. I could go on an enormous length about her, and in my book, in fact, I do. She's grew up in New Mexico. She spent her whole life there, except for studying in Spain and some international work. She was born to a fairly affluent rancher family, and she became the first Spanish-speaking, the first bilingual home demonstration agent for the Extension Service in the state of New Mexico. And she went around, along with sharing university knowledge about how to make, how to use a pressure canner, for instance. And this, by the way, in Michigan, this kind of work was mostly handled by Michigan State. But she also did a bunch of research and collected recipes for New Mexican food and put together what is really one of the earliest New Mexican cookbooks. It's called Historic Cookery. You can still get it today. So here she is. And this is a totally, there's nothing, she gives you like the chili powder version, and she gives you the chili pods version, right? And this is how you make a New Mexican chili sauce. And she was very interested in making Latina women in New Mexico, like supporting them to feel proud of their heritage and what they had. There's this wonderful moment where she was visiting a family's house, and it was the Great Depression, and they were eating homemade whole wheat tortillas and beans and chili sauce, and they gave her corned beef from a can and white bread, which was like company food, right? Because they thought, having, with the Americanization through homemaking attitude being so prevalent, they thought that their food was poor people's food, and that this visitor from the government, like, it wasn't good enough for her. And so she was very concerned. She believed in and promoted Latino pride. So moving on to our next topic, and this is one of the really cool things I found out, is home economics in the military and in military food. So I was listening to one of the fun things about working on this book. Actually, I'm going to stop the sharing for a moment so you can have a visual Zoom break from the slides, and you can see my face for a minute. Also the face possibly of Malcolm, who decided he wanted to participate. One of the fascinating things about researching home economics was the more I learned about home economics, the more I saw it interweaving through US history of the 20th century. And, I was not like what's the word I'm looking for? Like, I was not splitting hairs trying to find it, right? It was really there. So I listened, for instance, to an episode of the food podcast Gastropod back in 2018, maybe. And they were talking about military food and how complicated it is and how hard it is to come up with MREs and rations that will, quite literally survive being, if a soldier jumping out of a plane, and will still be nutritious and still something that people want to eat. And I said, well, there's got to be home economists in here somewhere, because these are the people who worked on nutrition. These are the people who are dietitians. And I contacted Natick, Massachusetts, which is their big food research lab, and they had no idea what I was talking about. And they just were very perplexed. But when I went and did a bunch more research into military dietitians, lo and behold, there they were. So let's go back to the presentation here. So this right here is a, I forget, mid-1930s. This is the dietitians and dietitian students, dietetic students at Walter Reed Hospital. So dietitians joined the military in World War I which was the founding of the American Dietetics Association. And the co-founder was Lena Francis Cooper, the previously mentioned, who promoted vegetarian cooking and worked for Battle Creek with the eugenicists, and later moved on to Montefiore Hospital in the Bronx. And during World War I, she became the first person running dietetics at the US Army. And she fought for decades, for the rest of her life, to get military status for these dietitians. Eventually she succeeded. So there are amazing stories about this, about like the heroism of these women. Again, these are pretty much always women, but I just have time for a couple of food notes. So one is, this is the Cookbook of the United States Navy. This is the 1944 edition. There are a bunch more editions. So what dietitians were doing in the military is they were everything from, designing rations for soldiers in general, designing recipes, and then working a lot with people who were injured or, who were in the hospital, being, what they needed to be eating as they were recuperating from surgery, or, in some cases they were working with refugees, they were working with former prisoners of war who had been starved and who needed to be brought back to normal eating very carefully. So I thought you guys would be amused. So all of the portions for this, the basic portion size for this cookbook is 100. So this is how you make griddle broiled lamb chops. It's a fairly simple recipe, though you are, of course, on a ship with your 65 pounds of bone-in lamb and your 3/4 cup of salt and your 1 3/4 tablespoons of pepper. So you should apparently serve them very hot, which I'm not really sure how you're going to do that if you're serving that many people. And this, by the way, this is here is like this was the ideal situation, was you were on a ship, because so many of the stories that the dietitians tell during wartime is of making do with deprivation. I go into a bunch of this in the book if you guys are interested, but suddenly getting just an entire cartload of lemons that somehow had made their way to the camp, or being out in the Philippines before the what turned out to on the Bataan Peninsula, which many of you will recognize as being the site of a pretty ferocious defeat, and having to ration water, having to ration everything because they were just running out of food. Being in refugee camps where they, in one case, as refugees, and again, trying to deal with military starvation level rations. So after World War II, this is sort of one of the most fun parts of the information that I came up with, is you ended up with the military dietitians starting to work on space food, because space food turns out to be a really fascinating problem. It's an engineering problem because you're in zero gravity. You can't have crumbs floating around and potentially clogging essential vents. They didn't even know originally if people would be able to swallow in zero gravity. Like all these things we totally take for granted. And they had to be things that were sufficiently delicious that people would actually eat them. Because as much as we think, oh, how, of course, you're a soldier, you're an astronaut, you're hungry, you'll eat something. It turns out people really stop eating. They did a lot of research on this. So the arrow here, that's Bea Finkelstein in the back. She is grinning. This is what was called Bea's Diner. You can see the sign on the door. And this was where she was testing out her various recipes to the astronauts and coming up with some of the sludges and the original space food. And it in ways that all of that stuff affected what we eat today in really surprising ways. Like everything from like the Capri Sun juice packs. I don't know if you need that. I'm a child of the 80s. I had 2 of them ever. Like that was a space food innovation. So and this is the last topic, but it's a kind of long one. What we probably most think of when we think of home economics food today is business home economics. And this was a really big field. This is what my mother worked in. She worked for General Foods when I was a kid. And you had all of these characters and advertising and recipes all put together by food business women. So you have the red Betty Crocker's picture cookbook, which I've heard lots of people tell me about, using as they were a kid. This is something that I found out about and found online, the Bake the No Knead Way by Anne Pillsbury. Anne Pillsbury was the Pillsbury version of Betty Crocker. So similarly did not exist as was this character, didn't actually exist. By the way, I have to say, to my disappointment, when you're baking the no knead way, all you are doing is not kneading the bread. It is kind of bizarre. It's not like, you leave it for 2 nights, like the Mark Bittman no knead bread. It's like you just wait an hour and then just bake it. And just to give you guys a sense of what these business home economists were like. So this is Marjorie Child Husted, who was one of the creator, essentially, of Betty Crocker, the popularizer. She joined the company in 1924. She was a native of Minneapolis, worked for the Red Cross and Cremette and the Women's Cooperative Alliance before she went to Gold Medal Flour. And she ran cooking classes for women to get them to use Gold Medal flour. And then she transitioned into writing radio copy and designing the marketing strategies for Betty Crocker. Because these were the women working on these projects were marketers. They were experts on consumers. And this is how women got into business, was as experts on housewives, basically. And she got 250,000 letters per year, Betty Crocker did. And she had a whole team of people answering it. And I thought it was interesting to see, what Marjorie Child Husted thought of those women, which is, she said they needed a champion. Here were millions of them staying at home alone, doing a job with children, cooking, cleaning on minimal budgets, the whole depressing mess of it. They needed someone to remind them they had value. Which Betty Crocker did, though at the same time, it's this fascinating paradox that all of these recipes and this material for women who are housewives were being produced by women who had careers, were working women who did not do their own cooking, who did not do their own housework, who brought home work to do after dinner. A lot of them were married. Most of them did not have children, the women who worked in the home economists in business. And they often did not think that they were pushing domesticity. A lot of them thought that they were creating quick convenience dinners so that women could have jobs. But, they were part of this femininity industrial complex of the 50s and 60s for sure. And I have found, actually, since I moved to North Carolina, even more of these enormous numbers of cookbook pamphlets, brochures that companies produced. I think just in general, there's a lot more old stuff in North Carolina than there is in New Orleans, where you have lots of hurricanes. So this is, I've got some doozies for you guys here. This is the aspic salad pie from General Foods. And as much as I have come to, after I put this in the book and made fun of it, I wrote a newsletter in which I, said that Jello salad actually really deserves a lot of respect. That said, I still have not been able to wrap my head around this one. So you basically prepare lemon Jello 2 ways. You mix some of it with tomato sauce, and then you mix the rest of it. It's lemon Jello with frozen mixed vegetables and cottage cheese and salad dressing. And then you put it in a pie crust and you garnish it with this mixed veg and cottage cheese. And if any of you, like, I don't know, maybe it's good. One of these days, I think I clearly have to make it, even though I'm fairly appalled at the very thought. You also had, so here's a cookbook for the Poultry and Egg National Board, plain and fancy ways with eggs. And it's orange egg. You combine an egg and orange juice and you serve it. And I can only guess that what they were trying, I can only guess that this is a way to get protein into a kid who doesn't want to eat protein, right? Like what else could it be, right? Like, it's like one step away from being the, whatchamacallit, from Breakfast at Tiffany's, right? But no, like you are, the goal here is clearly to hide the egg. And I do shudder at the thought of the consistency of that juice. And one job that business home economists had that people who did not grow up with this, are like myself, are very surprised to learn about, is they worked for utility companies. They worked for the power companies, because the power companies sold appliances as well as power. And they did a whole amazing range of things. And a lot of it was actually like electrical engineering in your own home. But they also put together recipes, and they would put recipes in your bill. You would go to pay your power bill at the office, and they would have a little sample kitchen there, and they would have events and teach you how to use things. And they did holiday cookbooks like this one. So this I just found a month or two ago. It's the Duke Power Home Service Along Home Lines. Get it? With holiday living. And they're telling you that these are things that will like be low, like will save you electricity, right? It's a way to create something festive. So this is basically a cheese ball, like with style. As you can see, Mr. Little light bulb dude is pressing the blender. So basically it's two cheese balls, and you put one on top of the other. And I feel like this is something that you would like see Amy Sedaris doing. I'm sure it's cream cheese and Roquefort cheese and grated onion and so on. I'm sure it tastes delicious. It just sounds a little awkward. And let's see. Here we are. They also worked for dishware companies. This is the Wherever pot and pan company. I also found this one recently, something called Tallerini. I have this is one of those other mysteries. It looks like, it's butter, and it's kind of like it's sort of it basically, I guess, like a mac and cheese plus, right? Like you've got ground beef, you've got tomato soup, you've got broad noodles. The only part of it that sounds maybe not so exciting to me is the corn. But I'm sure it's delicious. But you can see the point here is to get the most out of your pan set / try to convince you that you need 3 different pans to make this recipe, right? So they were, a lot of business home economists saw themselves as educators, but they were definitely trying to sell stuff. Similarly, when microwaves came out, here's one of many recipes from many microwave cookbooks that you will find in your average flea market. This is JCPenney's Guide to Microwave Cooking, in which they want you to make brisket in which that you microwave for 2 hours, which is definitely one of those things where like you have to, like, why would you, this is not saving any time. It's using a ton of electricity. Like, okay, I guess you can leave the house, but I do not know why you would make beef brisket in microwave. Here's some covers that I thought were just amusing. This sunny Lipton, California dip. That's a pretty small booklet. And this fairly appalling fancy catfish cookbook, though I must say, to be fair, I do not like catfish. But again, from as much as it's easy to mock some of these business home economists' recipes, there's plenty of stuff that's actually really good. So this is from the Louisiana School Food Service Association a beak full of recipes, which I think is supposed to be like a book full of recipes. And this is a recipe for mirliton pie. And mirliton is chayote. It's a mild squash. And this is just a standard New Orleans recipe. And some real, home economists, some of these commercial recipes are very much part of our lives. So on the left here is Dorcas Riley, who developed the green bean casserole with crispy fried onions on top, the canned fried onions, the Thanksgiving classic. This is perhaps a little bit less well known in the North, but you have the Helen Corbett put together this, it's called Cowboy Caviar. It's a black-eyed pea salad that is very delicious. Mildred Day and Melita Jensen created the Rice Krispie treat. And Ruth Wakefield of Toll House, she was a home economist. She was a home economist who then started an inn and a restaurant, which was a home economics job. It was the hotel school at Cornell was part of the home economics program. So to finish up, just some stuff about today. Actually, I will put my face back on the screen for this as well. So home economics is still around today. Business home ec is really gone. It was replaced by business and marketing, and women, being able to go to business school and to culinary school, and not having to go through the back door into business anymore. But the education parts and the nutrition parts are still around. The federal government, the military, home economics classes, it's often called family and consumer sciences now. This is all still around. And it is mostly focused on nutrition and, with a couple of exceptions. So this here, there is one problem, which is the problem of the canned biscuit. This here to the left is a cross stitch that I made for a professor who was a source of mine for the book. This is something she said at a conference. She said, "I will haunt them to their grave if I see a canned biscuit." Because one of the problems with home economics classes is that there's been such a crash in the visibility of the profession and in the university training programs for home economics teachers that you have a lot of people teaching classes who don't know everything I've just been talking about, right? And they think that home economics is about stitching aprons and making brownies. And so they tend to do, I purposely am not attributing this recipe because I don't want to embarrass anybody. So they're doing things like, here's a home ec recipe from the current vintage, which is microwave monkey bread, wherein you start with a can of biscuits and brown sugar and butter and water. And the thing is this, I have nothing against microwave monkey bread, but it seems hard to justify spending the time in a classroom in, our limited school day to teach kids how to make refrigerated biscuits into a sugary dessert. But what they're much more interested in is, so for instance, this is the University of Central Arkansas in 2019, making burgers great again. This was a veggie burger, and this was part of a family and consumer sciences, I believe it was the master's degree program, nutrition lab, wherein they were taking a popular food item and they were reinventing it to be healthy and to use local ingredients, and they were doing taste tests and they were having people evaluate it, and then they had to go back and reformulate and just do another iteration. So this was a veggie burger. It was quite good. That's what home economics food is supposed to be about. You have My Plate. That is the remnants of the Bureau of Home Economics are now called NEFA, and they're part of the USDA, and they are creating recipes that are nutritious and that are fun, and they have put them out in Spanish as well. And they tried, the opposite of the assimilationist stuff. they are really trying to make it accessible to kids from a wide range of cultures and backgrounds. And I do not have a slide for this, unfortunately, but I noticed that the U.S. Army dietitians have created, they're working on a meals ready, an MRE project, wherein they are both coming up with new ways to use MREs. Like they had like this chocolate mousse that was made with like the dairy packet and like the chocolate powder. And they're researching it to see the impact on soldiers' gut microbiomes, which is super cool. And I should probably write a follow-up story that is about that. So that is the end of our journey through home economics food today. I hope I did not completely overwhelm you. You guys, the book is out in the world. The paperback's coming out in May. I have a very occasional newsletter, Twitter, Instagram. You guys can always email me. And with that, I will, I'd love to answer any questions that you guys have.
Again, if you'd like to ask a question directly of Danielle, all you need to do is raise your hand, use the little icon at the bottom of the screen to raise your hand. And if you have any questions you'd like to put in the chat, we'll be happy to pass those along as well.
Yeah. And I will say, I did get one comment on the candle salad, which was that her mother, who is a home economics teacher, had 4-H students do that as like their first foods demonstration because it was easy. And apparently there were never any problems. So maybe, kids in the 50s and 60s didn't have the dirty minds of kids today.
I have to admit, as a child of the 50s and 60s, I have seen that salad. I might even have made it in Girl Scouts or home ec or something. It's like Rachel's raised her hand. She's got a question. There we go.
Hello, it's Rachel in London again. Sorry, I do love
London. That's
food.
Amazing.
I tell everybody about Arbor's culinary historians. I think you're my greatest discovery during lockdown. I just love you all. That was really interesting, Danielle. And having been in London and got a a kitchen full of recipe books that came with with appliances and things like that. I've never actually thought of them in a home economics way. So I can't wait to go downstairs to my kitchen to look at all my recipe books, and I'm going to reevaluate them and sort of think of them in a different way. Actually, they were just sort of recipe books that came with the appliance. I must be honest, and I don't know whether I should say this, but often, and please don't be offended, we used to disregard a lot of those recipe books. They seem to be, devoid of colour, devoid of flair, if I may be so bold as to say. And I wondered if you've got any insight into whether, because these appliances had to work for such a wide demographic, particularly in America, that they had to be sort of quite bland and vanilla, so not to be seen to disregard certain areas of the population.
I think that is a really good point. They often were standardized, right? They were
that's a good word.
Highly standardized. And that was the whole idea, is that, home economists developed standardized measurements, right? They wanted you, especially with the people who were selling products, they wanted to just guarantee that you follow the directions and it's going to work fine. And in fact, Betty Crocker's employees, one of the things they would do is they would watch people actually cooking, and they would see everything that they did wrong, and they would make sure that the recipes worked. So leveling a scoop of flour with your knife, so it packs it down and it packs more flour into the measuring cup. They would test their recipes with, the flour done loosely spooned in versus leveled, because they knew that people would do it wrong. So, and they were trying to appeal to as many people as possible, right? So you have a bunch of sort of anglicized international quote unquote recipes, right? Like stuff that was a blander version, especially in the 50s and 60s. And then finally, I think it's interesting to think about like the difference between this and like a cookbook author today is these women, these companies put out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of recipes just constantly. They had enormous numbers of recipes. So they just were not like, they weren't like trying to create the most beautiful, delicious recipes ever that you would keep for the rest of your life. Like they were on a treadmill. So it's not like they had the time to put together stuff that was really special, I think.
Thank you. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you.
Looks like next up we had Dan. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you to unmute.
Actually, Lee was in the queue before me.
Gotcha. We can jump to Lee then. No worries.
Hi. Thank you for letting me go. So I am a culinary instructor. And
fascinating.
I teach kindergarten all the way up through adults. So my question is around culinary instruction, because what I see in schools is that we've kind of segmented what used to be home ec. So you have like your business classes, your econ classes, you have nutrition as part of health, but we don't have like culinary instruction as part of the day-to-day I do after school in K-12. So where do you see that going? Because something I am hearing in strategic planning in schools is that we want to integrate more life skills, which to me sounds like home economics, but I don't know when we're going to see that or if we're going to see that or what the general trend outside of my metro is.
Yeah, so I definitely, I've seen exactly what you've seen in terms of that division between there is, so let me backing up a tiny bit. So one of the ways that home economics / family and consumer sciences has managed to stay in the curriculum, especially in modern, the current era, is as vocational education, as, career tech education. And this goes back well over a century. And so when you're looking at that, you have all of this culinary instruction as vocational instruction. So you have serve safe classes, you have restaurant classes, you have in FCCLA, you have a whole lot of, competitions for people who are going to be chefs or, caterers, or just work in the commercial food industry, which is a big industry. But what I have seen less of is that life skills. And in like the extant family consumer sciences classes, you do have them both. So you have people who are trying, classes where you're trying to teach kids how to make, get a dinner on the table for themselves. But there's been a resistance in the field to pushing life skills just because the way that they've remained, they're in the Federal Vocational Education Act. So I don't know what's going to happen with that, but I have wondered the same thing because I have heard so many people. Every time I talk to people when I was working on the book, right, they would say people our kids need to learn life skills. We need home economics because our kids don't know life skills. So I think it's really relevant. And I definitely think that there should be more of that. But again, within the school day, it's really hard to fit everything in. And it's hard to to put together a class that covers all of the bases, especially as when you're if you have a 45-minute class period, trying to teach kids to be able to cook dinner in a 45-minute lab period, it's really hard.
All right, so now we will go ahead and jump to Dan. I'll go ahead and ask you to unmute.
Okay, thanks. I was intrigued by your inclusion of a military cookbook because I look at a lot of cookbooks and that often means I gloss over entire genres as typically uninteresting. And that had been my attitude about military cookbooks until at one point I decided to just look through one from the 40s or 50s. I think the title is Army Food and Messing, but I'm not 100% sure. And the pattern that jumped out at me was, as boring as most of the recipes were, you were getting a snapshot of both what soldiers expected, liked, and then how cooks dealt with the constraints of availability of ingredients, equipment, and time, and everything else. But in terms of the expectations, the thing that shocked me was in a standard recipes, if they called for garlic, they called for 1 clove of garlic for 100 servings, which I think of as a homeopathic dose. And then the thing that finally made me decide to keep this book is, if it was an Italian recipe, they used 2 cloves.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Pardon me with the camera, by the way, but my other cat is getting in the way.
But so it made me wonder, have any food historians taken a deep look at military food and cookbooks, and the people who developed them, or even just a bibliographer?
I mean,
don't know what's out there.
that is a great question. And the answer is basically, I don't know. There are definitely, I would love to know if that is the case. It's certainly interesting. One has to assume that there's been someone who's written a dissertation on this, because like this is the kind of topic on which people write dissertations. But
Right.
yeah, I think, like all cookbooks, right? They reflect the mores of the time, and most importantly, like the values of the people who were writing the cookbooks, right? So in this case, yeah, they had this. This was back when garlic was from, home economics was, despite having a really long and fruitful history in Black colleges, was dominated by middle-class white women for a very long time. In fact, it still is today. And that was, yes, this homeopathic dose of garlic, this is what you were talking about at that time.
Right.
Cats are really going crazy behind me.
I mean, for me, it was a good reminder, because I grew up eating food that contained a lot of garlic. And I also happened to grow up in a town that was 2/3 Italian. And so Italian food was, if not what I ate at home all the time, something as common as that. But I realized that I was also growing up in an era when even pizza was just becoming common around the country.
Right. And again, this is why I said that pointed out that like the point of home economics recipes was not deliciousness. That was never the point. Like that was never the primary goal. The primary goal was, all of these other important factors, but it was not to be the most delicious or the most authentic dish ever. All right. And I also I want to also take a moment, because I've been messaged a whole bunch of questions, so I wanted to answer a few of these.
Okay, thanks.
Yes. So I'm going to sort of run through these because I know we're starting to get to time. A lot of business home economists are still alive. This is from Eleanor H. Did I interview any of them? Many. I interviewed many of them. They were really fun. And I, in fact, Satnik St. Marie, who ran home economics at JCPenney's for a while and was an incredibly pioneering and innovative businesswoman. She lives near my parents, and I went and interviewed her several times, and she's in her 90s. Someone's Ellen and Paul are asking, were there home economists in other countries? Absolutely, yeah, all around the world. And in some cases, it grew out of, in some cases, colonial and missionary education, wherein they were teaching girls how to be housewives. But then after, the home economics project in the US drew international attention from early on. And then starting after World War II, home economics became a soft power tool for the US in fighting the Cold War. And they sent and funded a whole lot of home economists, including Fleming Cottrell, around the world to start home economics schools and colleges and instruction all around the world, also as an anti-poverty measure. Let's see. Mary L is asking how recipes, basically about recipes developed to minimize sugar and what the effects of lobbyists and politicians are. Those are really big questions. So sugar, as you know, so as I was, saw from the World War I recipes going forward, home economists had worked for a long time on things like sugar minimizing recipes, though originally it was just for rationing purposes, right? Because you were like having sugar shortages for the war effort. Politicians and lobbyists have been, they've been present all along. They are present because the USDA is an agency that is very, what's the word I'm looking for? Intertwined with lobbyists and politicians. Even back in the 1930s, there was a Bureau of Home Economics got in trouble because they were doing one recipe that the wheat industry was worried was going to make people use less wheat. And, the entire nutrition industry is tied up with lobbyists and politicians as well. So, this is a really politicized space. Like what we eat, what we promote, what's considered nutritious, it is all pretty complicated. And there was one other thing I wanted to say. Oh, and of course, to this day, the remaining business home economists who haven't, retired yet, they work as essentially, for these lobbying groups. That's what the Poultry and Egg Board, who wrote the Orange Julius, someone was pointing out, it was basically an Orange Julius, egg and orange juice recipe. They were trying to promote their products. So yeah, it is a complicated and intertwined, complicated and intertwined relationship.
Looks like Sharon Sundling has her hand up to ask a question.
Got on mute. Yes, I happen to think that while you were talking about military, I grew up in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and I saw no foreign food recipes in hardly any magazines or cookbooks at that time. I was really interested in cooking even as a child. And as far as the military goes, I met two cooks who had worked on big ships and in the submarine, and they didn't even have a cookbook. They said they just relied on what they knew. So that they probably had regular food as best they could. Also, I had a history teacher who wouldn't take a gift of a Hershey bar because he had been a soldier in World War II and couldn't stand chocolate because it had been adulterated with so much wax, so it wouldn't melt.
Well, it's sad to think of anybody eating anything that would make them give up chocolate.
Yes, it is. It is.
Yeah, but that's an interesting point also about the military cooks you knew not having cookbooks. Yeah, these were the cookbooks that were being put out by the people in charge who were, home economists. But in reality, how common were they? How widely did they circulate? How much did people? There was a lot of improvisation than when people were actually using this on the ground. And I have a few other chat questions too. These are great comments. One person, Mark C, asked, why was Jell-O the go-to dessert in the 50s, and who thought mixing vegetables and meat in it was a good idea? So I feel like I'm not, even though I've written about this, I still feel like I'm not the best person to really explain this, in that I grew up with one Jell-O mold in my family. I did not grow up in the Midwest, which has been much more of a home of Jell-O molds. One part of it is that going way up, well, first of all, it's worth remembering that like the sweet savory combination has been popular long before we all started eating like sea salt caramels and like Chubby Hubby Ben & Jerry's ice cream. So, just because something is mixing sweet and savory does not mean it's not necessarily gross at all. One piece is a class thing that going way back, gelatin before it was turned into powders and sheets and commercially made, gelatin was an aspect where incredibly time consuming to make, and you basically had to have a large staff, because you had to not only you had to boil a bunch of like hooves and bones, and you had to then refine it over and over again until it was clear, and it was basically a sign like that you were rich if you could do gelatin. So when people when it began to be something that consumers could do at home very easily, they were using it often the same way that you would use flavorless aspic, which is in savory dishes, even though it was, the Jell-O brand was sugared when it was sweetened. I think also, I asked a friend of mine who is a food writer, and Jell-O molds accomplish a lot of different things at once. Many of them are really very delicious, first of all, no matter what they look like. Sometimes maybe you shouldn't think too much about it, but like the Jell-O mold in my family involves red wine. It's we have it for Thanksgiving, and red Jell-O of any flavor, chopped pecans, chopped cranberries, chopped celery. And so it's super crunchy and it's great. They looked sophisticated. They were fast. They were easy. They're something that kids usually like, right? Because they're fun. So it just it was something that hit a lot of bases at once. It could look sophisticated, and it was like your sophisticated thing. It was something that people would eat. So, I don't necessarily think that Jello salads are the greatest thing ever, but I really resist there's a lot of hate on Jello salads and Jello dishes that comes across mostly as just being kind of classist sometimes from the mainstream, like the fancy food, from the New York Times food section, from that portion of the food world. All right, do we have any more questions?
Looks like Sharon has another question, so I'm going to go ahead and ask you to unmute again.
Great.
Well, this is not really a question, but in one of our culinary historian meetings, we had somebody talk about Jell-O, and they said it became so popular once electric refrigerators became available and popular. We didn't have to have ice boxes anymore. They were electric. So it made it easier to make Jell-O.
That makes a lot of sense. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. It's interesting. Yeah, because ice boxes hung on for a lot longer than I had realized. But yes, once you have a fridge, right, exactly. It becomes all these other things that you can do. So thank you. Yeah, that's good to add to my arsenal of Jell-O facts.
Okay, well, I think it's probably, we've come to the end of the questions. I just want to say what a great pleasure it's been to have you with us today, Danielle. It's been an honor, really, and super interesting. Totally appreciate you're giving us your time. And again, I'm just really delighted to have you with us, and want to make sure that we thank our friends at the Ann Arbor District Library as well, who are always such a great asset and a way for us to reach out literally across the world. We do have people tuning in from England and from coast to coast. So we really appreciate that. And I did just want to mention that next month we have, since we've been talking a lot about the military actually today, we're trying something new. We're going to have an international roundtable on the provisions of war, presenters examining how food has played a role in both battlefields, home front mobilization, and internal conflicts over religion and nationalism. So it should be very instructional. And then I say, continuing our bellicose theme, in March, we're going to have a presentation by botanist Judith Sumner, who is going to be talking about how vegetable gardeners helped win World War II. So there's going to be information about those on our website shortly. And if you are interested, we encourage you to sign up so we can send you the link to the talk. And the website again is culinaryhistoriansannarbor.org. We want to thank you again, Danielle. I want to thank everyone for watching. And have a good evening, everyone.
Yes, thanks all for having me.
Yes.